as your disputed or reappraised bio said, you've worked on acute psychiatric wards, and presumably you're making decisions about when to admit people, when to allow people to leave. I mean, what are the terms you're using, and would you then respond to Lucy's suggestion that the diagnostic categories have not proven to be scientifically absolutely valid?
I'll go for the first bit, Joanna. I would say that basically if your mental, physical and social, your mind, sort of your thoughts and your feelings day to day, the way you think about, react and behave towards and the world behaves to you, if those are good enough, and if your body is healthy enough and the world you live in is safe enough and loving enough and challenging enough in just the right measure, that's good enough to have go nowhere near my doorstep, let alone my ward. So we're looking at an uneasy tension between some very, very difficult things. Ideal health, of course, will be a complete state of mental, physical and social well-being without any evidence of infirmity. That's what the World Health Organization thought in 1948. Now, the only people I know who have a complete state of total perfect well-adjustment and mental, physical and social is A, probably an archangel, or B, not a person I'd like to have a beer with. Because, I like people a little bit screwed up. I'm screwed up. Everyone's screwed up. Whether we're ill or not means it's getting in the way of our living our life. Now, is there a place of biology in that? Lucy, get real. This is 2020 something or other. COVID has wiped one of those years from my brain. But that must be a biological thing, probably glutamate in my hippocampus. But the point is that we are now getting to the point where we can actually say, Joseph Ledoux says this very clearly, our present diagnostic systems are complete turkey. But there's something very funky going on between the hippocampus, the central nucleus output of the amygdala, in the presence of a threat. And we can spot that in a brain scan now. That's biology. And we can identify that as an illness.
I'm going to let Lucy respond in a moment. I just want to bring Sarah in as you're working in neuroscience. And I know you've particularly worked on people with PTSD and also with those people who have autism and working on the interoceptors and so on. So, I mean, would you then come in on this, on neuroimaging and the kind of, the sort of physical properties of, are there differences, observable differences in these cases?
There are profound differences and mental illness. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of how disabling mental illness can be. And I've seen people, I was working in Detroit for 5 years, who are so traumatized, they really couldn't live their lives anymore. And I've worked with people with depression who have gone through phases where they can't get out of bed. And my heart breaks for how disabling these conditions can be, and medication can be a lifesaver. Medication can get people to the point where they can interact with the world again. And yes, I am a strong believer in societal change and social solutions, but sometimes medical interventions get you to the point where you're able to engage with the world again, and I think it's very dangerous to give people the message that they're not needed. In regard to diagnostic categories, no, actually the world is so interesting. Categories are blurred in life, and research at the moment is trying to improve the diagnostic categories all the time. I've sat on committees that have talked about DSM. There's actually a new way of looking at diagnostic criterion led by the NIH in America, which is looking at symptoms and trying to get rid of the categories of disorders and instead look at types of symptoms so we can treat symptoms. And these symptoms will still cluster in different categories, which broadly map on to the diagnostic categories of DSM, such as depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia. And so while those categories are not absolute, they are useful guides in helping treat people, and science is evolving to be more specific, and I think they serve a useful function for treatment.
Lucy, can I bring you in on this question of, the sort of types of symptoms? And you've written a lot about language and getting away from medical language. Do you want to come in on this?
Indeed. So I wouldn't use words like symptoms. I wouldn't use words like condition. I wouldn't use words like PTSD. I wouldn't use words like mental illness. I wouldn't use words like psychiatric diagnosis, because these are not diagnoses in any legitimate, understandable sense as far as I can see. So if we're going to kind of get real, as Mark has urged me to do, and I like to think I've got pretty real during my career. I mean, I've worked for many, many years on inpatient wards, as you have, I know, and outpatient settings. Then actually what we're talking about and I think this is implied in what you're saying actually, Sarah, is understandable responses to life circumstances. A trauma reaction is not a medical illness, and in some senses it's what our minds and bodies are designed to do, and the healing doesn't come through finding that interesting bit of the hippocampus, Mark, that you just referred to, where something odd is going on at the synaptic gap. The cure is actually helping people to process, very often through psychological means, what they've been through, to help to make their world, their relationships, and indeed their feeling of safety in their bodies, settle down again, return to what we usually call normal. And those are not medical interventions for medical conditions. Those are human ways of healing the many, many forms of distress that we're faced with, including traumatic events.
Sarah,
so I'm going to come back to that, and I just don't agree at all. Of course, it's understandable reactions that people have to trauma, but what you see is that everybody, pretty much, who suffers a trauma has a traumatic reaction, but 10% of those people carry on 3 months, 6 months after the trauma with flashbacks, profound nightmares, and it's in those 10% that it becomes disabling, and then it's much more a biological thing that requires some degree of intervention. And I'm not ruling off the social ones at all, but if it was just an understandable reaction, then everyone would have it, and that's not true. You see this sort of categorical split in those who have a reaction but then deal with it and get on with those lives, and those who can't anymore.
Can you just really quickly clarify, and I'll let Mark come in, just what is the nature of the initial traumatic reaction? Again, is that, how is that discernible within your work?
So it's really done by the time course. So just initially, people will be very locked into the trauma, be thinking about it, feel like the world is an unsafe place, have flashbacks, have nightmares, have sweating, have hyper reactivity of the autonomic nervous system, and actually lots of people will have those kind of symptoms, and it's only when they are lasting 6 months beyond the trauma, and then you can really see that those people have this pathological reaction that hasn't gone away with time.
Yeah, I know Lucy wants to respond. I'm just going to let Mark respond really quickly, and then I'll let you come in again.
Wow, where do we begin? 6 months? Oh, sorry, 7 months. No, you haven't. You should be over it by now. 5 months? Oh, well, let's give you another 6. You'll still be ill up until next Thursday. I mean, we've got some serious conceptual problems here, obviously. Before we go any further, and I return to the idea that, quote, medication can be a lifesaver, close quote, what's life? And how does it save it? But, we've got some real problems here. Audience, I'd like you to join us now. We have kind of, the left down in the basement, we have the body, bing, next floor. Psychology, bing, next floor. Microbiology, bing, next door. Life lived. It's all over the place in this supermarket of ideas. I'm going to ask you as this debate goes on, so listen to every time you hear the word medical or biological or brain or something to do with the vagus nerve or whatever, to try and think about what that word means mentally, physically, socially, and here comes the big one we haven't mentioned yet, spiritually. My hopes and, oh my God, my hopes and dreams for me and my loved ones in the future. By loved ones, I mean loved ideas as well as loved people. Try if you can to come out of this language game and try and think of simultaneously of the medical, the biological, the social and the psychological implications of every tricky verbal landmine we step on in the next 30 minutes. It's hard to hold lots of ideas in your brain. The answer is in there. And when society does that, bingo, we are going somewhere. Please start to think about it now for the rest of this debate, if you will. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. I'm just going to move us into the kind of second area, but I'm going to bring Lucy in initially to start this. The second area is...
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.